Nice, southern France and the Somme. May to July 1916. In the footsteps of her heroine. From her window seat in Marianne's apartment overlooking the Promenade des Anglais in Nice, Edith found it hard to believe there was a war on, let alone that she'd left the family home in London's Holland Park to do her bit. It was strange, she thought, that she was sitting here watching the world go by, when soon she'd be using her skills to tend the wounded and help the dying to pass over with dignity. Her plans had been met with opposition from her mother. She understood, of course. Poor Mamma. Born Lady Muriel d'Averley, Mamma had lost a lot of the status that went with her birth by marrying a second son and not a lord. She did, however, hold a special place in social standing, as she'd inherited her family's country estate in Leicestershire, along with a considerable fortune, something that rarely happened to a woman, but there'd been no male member left in her entire family line. A socialite at heart, Mamma had tried hard not to acknowledge that there was a war on at all, and had carried on business as usual. The business in question had been several desperate attempts to marry Edith off to a suitable beau. But she didn't want to be married off, suitable or otherwise. Her first love was her career, something she realized was quite a shocking thing for a young lady to pursue. How much better for Mamma if she'd had a daughter of the ilk of Lady Eloise or Lady Andrina. Daughters of her uncle, Lord Mellor, and his French wife, Lady Felicity, they were a lovable but frivolous pair of girls. It was through them that Edith knew and had become close to Marianne, as Marianne was their aunt, sister to Lady Felicity. Edith had to admit, though, that wanting her married off wasn't the only reason behind her Mamma's objections. Mamma had already seen her two sons off to war. Douglas, who loved nothing more than managing their mother's Leicestershire estate, but whose innate patriotism and sense of duty had driven him to volunteer. And Christian, a student of medical science, driven by the same values as Douglas. They were now both commissioned officers fighting in the Somme area, the same region that Edith planned to go to. It had been Christian's letter that had alerted Edith to the desperate need for doctors. He told her how much he admired a Scottish woman doctor, Elsie Inglis, who, at 28, the same age as Edith, had gone to the Somme and set up a hospital, despite opposition from the War Office. Edith's own accomplishment in becoming a surgeon had been an easier path than the one Elsie had taken. Elsie had been driven to set up her own medical school in order to study, but Edith's father, being a top surgeon himself, meant that doors had opened that wouldn't normally have done so for a woman. It was strange, she thought, how she'd been the one to take up the profession and not her two brothers, though of course Christian's calling was in another very important medical field, so some of their father's genes must be in him too. But for all her qualifications, the same fate befell her as had happened to Elsie. The War Office refused Edith's application for a post in the war zone in the same condescending way that Elsie had encountered. Edith was indignant at the manner of the refusal. How dare they say her place was at home? They seemed to be ignoring the fact that hundreds of women were already in war zones all over the world. Nurses, voluntary aid workers, and first aid nursing yeomanry, given the ridiculous acronym of fannies, and all of them were doing a sterling job. She'd had no joy with the British Red Cross either. They'd said they would contact her if they found they needed more personnel, but at present they felt they had enough medical staff. With attempts to provide her services thwarted, Edith had taken a leaf out of Elsie Inglis's book and had gone it alone. She'd arranged to come and stay with Marianne in the south of France, so that she could also apply to the French Red Cross, as Elsie had done in the first instance. Edith's thinking had been that, being in France, her application would have a little more weight, besides which Marianne had influence in some very useful quarters. Bringing her attention back to the view she had from her window seat, Edith gazed down on the people wandering along the Promenade des Anglais. She loved the story of how the promenade got its name.